They became new residents of NLA, and the city grew as their home base. A fourth and fifth group of divisions were created at this time. Avalanche, a group dedicated to exterminating the incredibly powerful native creatures known as tyrants, and Arms, a group that developed weaponry for both dolls and infantry. Doug's numerous encounters with the tyrants while working with Nagi had earned him a place in Avalanche. Life was improving for the Earthlings trying to survive on the planet, but there was an ever-growing concern: the energy shortage. As the city's population grew, so too did the strain on their energy reserves. It was becoming increasingly clear that they would not be able to ignore the problem.
"It's only a matter of time. You need to do something, Captain."
"I understand. You don't need to lecture me about it, Mr. Aide." Maurice Choson and Nagi Kentaro had repeated the same conversation numerous times. A captain without a ship and an aide without a president. A strange conversation between the two who addressed each other with such titles. However, even deciding on a new public statement was becoming troublesome, and they had continued to converse in such a manner. Maurice and Nagi didn't dislike each other, but they didn't feel always that they could see eye to eye, so they were stilted. Nevertheless, there were no other individuals capable enough that were suited to leading the government or the military. They met often and unwillingly, with no choice but to cooperate.
"Oh, Vandam, you sure managed to weasel your way out of this one."
Nagi had intended for Vandam to replace him as head of the military, but he had instead taken up work with Arms after its establishment. It didn't come as a huge surprise. Vandam had been the chief engineer aboard the Moby Dick, after all. But Nagi, who had been left to do all this desk work, wasn't quite amused. This wasn't the way that he would have wanted things, but it was out of his hands. Nagi continued to meet with Maurice, and they finally confronted an unavoidable matter. "Give it to me straight. How much time do we have left?"
"About 1 week. After that, the civilian facilities will shut down."
Naturally, they were imposing limitations on energy use to combat the shortage. However, both men had wished to avoid that. It had only been 2 years since they had lost the Earth. The crew of the Moby Dick already had to deal with establishing a base on this strange new planet, and under such conditions, at the very least, they wanted to provide everyone with the same basic amenities that they had on Earth. Stricter living conditions would wear morale down very quickly, and that was their greatest fear. "I understand. I will carry out the aforementioned plan in 5 days.
Yes. That's what I wanted to hear. It's in your hands now, Captain."
The aforementioned plan was the recovery of the Moby Dick's main engine. They had investigated the report from Lin Li Ku and confirmed that the engine sector had crashed on the same continent as NLA. Their main engine had been seriously damaged by the alien pursuit forces, but the auxiliary engine would be enough to solve the current crisis in NLA. The DM engine, made up of the auxiliary and main engines, well, if they could obtain that high-output, high-efficiency power reactor, that would solve all of their energy problems in NLA all at once. But their current recovery plan faced 2 difficulties. The first was a matter of transportation. The DM engine was incredibly compact and lightweight compared to things such as nuclear fusion reactors, but it was still an engine from a massive immigrant ship. There were many logistical issues involved in its recovery and relocation in conditions with near 1G gravity. The second issue were creatures that might get in its way. The auxiliary engine had landed on a coastline, so despite there being miraculously little damage to it, it was right in the middle of a habitat of sea-dwelling creatures. In order to recover it safely, they would have to eliminate these threats. For that reason, Nagi had formed the Arms Group, to hasten the maintenance of machinery and dolls for the recovery operation. Would their preparations finish on schedule, or would they hit the limits of their energy reserves first? It was a race against time. 5 days after that decision was made, Nagi personally led Testament from NLA. His squad was comprised of an elite selection of doll pilots: Irina, Doug, Lau, and Gwyn. Of course, Nagi was piloting a doll as well, the highest performing frame that they had available, the Formula 0. But he still wasn't satisfied. "In order to survive on this planet, we need a considerable number more powerful dolls. If only we could just find the R&D sector and all those high-performance prototypes." However, the operation couldn't be delayed any longer. They had no choice but to use what they had available. Fortunately, the pilots accompanying him were the best of the best. This is T-001. We'll be arriving at the target zone shortly. The dolls had nearly reached their destination after a full day on foot. They stood by on the cliff-like terrain and launched a hopper camera. The video relay displayed inside their cockpits. Good, it's still intact. As they had found from their previous reconnaissance, the Moby Dick's auxiliary engine had fallen over onto the shore below the cliff. From their vantage point, the data readouts on the engine didn't indicate any damage, and that it was functioning normally. The operation begins in 300 seconds. Synchronize your clocks, we begin at 0. Nagi issued one last order and the squad gave a simultaneous roger. They weren't facing any sophisticated alien races or other humans, so they wouldn't have had to worry about the native creatures intercepting their communications. At the very least, it's less tense when we can communicate freely. The other members of the group felt the same, although there was a little time remaining before their operation, so they began to chat amongst themselves. If we get this done right, we don't have to cut back anymore. What do you know about cutting back, Gwen? I bet you're already just gonna stuff your face every single day. Hey, that's not nice. How would I maintain this slim physique if I ate that much?
Slim physique. Gwen, you might want to pack some muscles on. Those stick figure arms aren't going to help you protect Arena.
Gwen coughed loudly in response to Doug's comment. Meanwhile, Lau simply kept to himself while the rest conversed. I get the feeling he was a bit more cheerful before all of this happened, thought Nagi while he stared at the monitor. The counter had finally dropped into single digits, and once it hit 0, Nagi shouted, "Everyone, move out!" The 5 dolls leapt from the top of the cliff. The native sea creatures turned towards them all at once, sensing their presence. It was theorized that these Lumendel were swarming around the engine due to the heat it was giving off. If that were to be the case, they would surely meet with resistance when they try to recover it. Within the cockpits of the dolls was a database called the Collectopedia. It contained valuable information on the creatures and resources of the planet, put together from previous investigations. Information on the Lumidel was currently being overlaid onto their monitors. They would need to take care of these doll-sized creatures first. Nagi and Arena's frame spearheaded the assault. They slashed at the Lumidel across their path, one after another. The Lumidel began to recognize them as enemies and started to swarm around them. That was when Doug and Lau began their long-distance bombardments. The recon teams had a tough time dealing with the creatures, but the 4 elites would have no problems taking them out. Alright, now's my chance. While the rest of them were distracting the Lumidel, Gwyn's doll had circled beneath the cliff to approach the engine. He was in low-impact movement mode, sneaking as quietly as he could. Pay no mind to Gwyn. Gwyn's frame was not equipped with any weapons. On his back was a gravity control unit. Although they were originally intended to provide artificial gravity aboard the Moby Dick, they would eventually be used as a basis for doll flight packs. Gwyn's job was to place this device on the auxiliary engine. Doing so would offset its enormous mass so that even a doll could transport it. A doll alone wouldn't be able to power the device, but all he had to do was connect it directly to the engine and power wouldn't be a problem. Gwyn arrived undetected and began attaching the device. Looks like Gwyn's got it under control. Arena informed Nagi as she cleaved a Lumidel in 2. Of course, Nagi had already been keeping tabs on the situation through his sub-monitor. Even if they succeeded in fending off the creatures, the battle would be meaningless if they didn't get the engine back safely. However, before Nagi could respond, the doll's onboard AI sounded a warning siren. What the? A tyrant? The AI indicated an enormous creature that was emerging from beneath the sea. It seemed the Lumidel were just prey to it. Several times longer than their doll frames, it grabbed Lumidels one by one and swallowed them whole. The arrogant riddle. Huh, quite an appropriate nickname for him. Whenever a tyrant was encountered, they were given unique names. That was precisely why the Earthlings were known as a race with a penchant for naming everything they see. I'm almost done, just keep doing what you're doing. The flustered Gwyn had disembarked his doll to finish fastening the gravity control unit to the engine. He was almost finished, but the waves caused by arrogant Riddle had soaked him from head to toe. Leave the tyrant to me! Doug's frame held up a massive rocket launcher ready to fire. Arms had developed it exclusively for Avalanche's use. It was difficult to handle, but it was designed specifically to combat the massive tyrants. The second Doug tried to pull the trigger to fire after acquiring his target, however, arrogant Riddle made an unexpected move. It tossed a Lumidel it had in its mouth directly towards his frame. The tyrant didn't appear to have high intelligence, it simply did so on a whim, or perhaps by chance. But as a result, the 4 rockets that Doug fired hit the Lumidel's body, exploding on contact. The point-blank explosion sent Doug and the nearby Lao flying away. "Doug! Lao!" Irina shouted with concern.
It's no big deal. The knee joint's busted. I can only provide long-range backup from here.
It seems both of their frames had been damaged. While it was fortunate that neither pilot was injured, their battle efficacy had dropped considerably. "Gwyn, we'll be right there. Just hold out till then." I've got this under control. First Lieutenant, don't worry about me." His words were confident, though his voice was anything but. It was dripping with fear. Which wasn't surprising considering he had to work right next to a massive tyrant that was devouring the Lumidel. But Nagi and Irina's frames were tuned up for close quarters combat. If they didn't take out the Lumidel blocking their path, they wouldn't have been able to have backed Gwyn up. Countless Lumidel fled towards Nagi's frame, knocking it down onto the sand. They seemed to be in a panic at the presence of arrogant Riddle.
If this keeps up.
He could see Gwyn frantically working through the sub-monitor. He couldn't order him to retreat, no matter how dangerous the situation. The future of NLA depended on him. "All right, it's done." Gwyn finally finished attaching everything and activated the gravity control device to make sure it was working properly. To put it simply, it was as if he had attached a giant balloon to the engine to carry it away. There wouldn't be any problems to relocate it now. Although his job was complete, he was a bit behind schedule for staying alive. The instant he raised his head ready to return to his doll, arrogant Riddle set its sights on him. Gwyn's instincts told him all he needed to know. "This thing wants to eat me!" He cowered in fear, the tyrant's arm extended, and Gwyn was convinced his life was about to end. But in that instant, something shattered his immobilizing fear. A familiar voice coming through his headset. "Gwyn, get down! I'll take care of this!" That was not the voice of anyone from their squad. The transmission came from a 6th doll, standing atop a cliff. A crimson-colored frame leapt down from above. Nagi recognized it immediately. "That's the newly finished frame from the R&D sector, the Wells Cane!" The others understood what he meant. Irina shouted through teary eyes, "Colonel Elma, you're alive!" The Crimson Wells danced through the air gracefully, unsheathing its shoulder-mounted G-Buster. "It's nothing personal, but we have to live on this planet too." With a point-blank strike from the G-Buster, the creature's skull was pulverized in an instant.
"Oh, it's a good thing you came, Elma."
"I'm sorry I'm late. The frame needed a bit of maintenance first." Elma squeezed Nagi's outstretched hand. The other members of the group smiled, and Elma explained the situation while Irina clung to her. She had repelled the alien bioweapons together with a young man before crashing on the planet. The doll the two of them had been riding had been blown outside of the ship at that time. However, the young man opened the hatch just before and threw Elma back towards the Moby Dick. If he hadn't done that, I don't think I would have been able to return to the ship either.
So,
Elma lowered her gaze at Nagi's words and shook her head.
"I see. But we owe him all of our lives. He was a true hero."
By the time Elma made it back to the Moby Dick, the hull had already begun to break apart as it entered the atmosphere. She made her way to the nearest sector and set its gravity control unit to max power to withstand the crash. It was a little more difficult after that. The area was teeming with vicious beasts. But fortunately for Elma, the sector she had taken refuge in was a sector where they were researching and developing prototype dolls, amongst other weaponry. After repairing one of the dolls, she set out immediately to find the rest of the crew. "To think that when I found you, you'd all be in the middle of a heated battle."
"That shouldn't come as a surprise. We're not welcome here. Seems like we always have to fight these natives to the death."
Lao scoffed at their situation. He seemed to have had his own thoughts on the way they exterminated the native creatures of the planet. "I see. I hope at some point we don't have to kill each other anymore, and can coexist peacefully." Everyone nodded at Elma's words. However, they didn't have all day to chat. They still had to recover the DM engine and find the sector Elma had crashed in, along with numerous other tasks.
"Dissolve the United Forces?"
Maurice was shocked. He didn't think Nagi's suggestion sane, and neither did the rest of them sitting there. Elma, Vandam, Irina, Gwyn, Lao, Doug, none of them hid their surprise. A day had passed since they recovered the auxiliary engine and R&D sector. and successfully returned them to NLA. Nagi's words felt like a splash of ice-cold water now that they had finally gotten things in order. Starting today, I am no longer Brigadier General Nagi. I will be Mr. Nagi, no higher ranked than any of the rest of you.
Mister? More like Sister Nagi.
Vandam was so taken aback he didn't even have time to come up with a proper comeback.
What's wrong?
Are you that surprised? Surprised as... Why are you doing this? Nagi explained his plan in response to Elma's question.
We can no longer return to the Earth or search for a new home. We have no choice but to live on this planet now. Did Robinson Crusoe have a military rank? Did the pioneers on the new continent have a military force?
Vandam mumbled distrustfully.
Are you trying to run away? You don't want to be commander anymore, so you're gonna break up the military?
Rest assured, NLA still should create its own autonomous government, and I will be chief of military. I'm not running away from my duties.
Autonomous government. Yes, perhaps that is necessary. Government officials are elected into office, but who would be willing to do that?
The rest of them ignored Maurice as he mumbled to himself. There were no political beneficiaries on this new planet. If he wanted to do something as boring as leading government, that was his prerogative. However, in order to live on this planet, we need a replacement military. I would like to call it Blade.
Blade? You mean that?
Correct. Beyond the Logos, Artificial Destiny Emancipators. Blade comes from the first letter of each of these words. Those were once spoken by someone who had developed a certain technology necessary for the Earthwide colonization project, a friend of Nagi's and mutual acquaintance of Vandam's.
That's certainly an appropriate name for those of us living here.
Precisely. And you will be their commander, Vandam.
Me?
Nagi smiled smugly at Vandam's surprise. What's wrong? Is the man who had just accused me of running away trying to do so himself?
No, but Elma's higher ranked than I am.
Military ranks have no meaning anymore. Elma was on her feet, already having cast her military insignia onto the floor. As a human being living on this planet, I will join Blade, under Commander Vandam. I'll join too.
Me too.
Everyone agreed with Elma. Doug and Arena, Gwyn and Lau, each of them cast off their military insignias. They all looked expectantly at Vandam. What's wrong, Vandam? They're waiting to hear your decision.
Fine. I'll be your commander or whatever. But if any of you disobey my orders, it'll be 100 million push-ups. You'll push until your biceps explode.
Everyone cheered at that response. From within all the excitement, though, came Maurice's timid voice.
Captain Nagi. No. Chief of Military. Actually, I have a proposal I'd like to make as well.
Oh? Please tell us. The man who had always spoken so confidently proposed the following in an uneasy voice.
I've been thinking. What if we named this planet Mira?
Mira? After Mira Torres? Maurice nodded. Mira Torres. Nagi remembered that name. She had contributed to the ECP, just like the person who had spoken the words that formed Blade. Yet she did not board the Moby Dick. He too held great respect for the woman that had bridged the gap between the military and civilians.
Yes, that's more than fine. I would like her ideals to take root. Here, on Planet Mira.